President Yoon's week-long overseas trip included a stop at the 77th session of the UN General Assembly in New York. There he delivered his first address in an 11-minute speech entitled Freedom and Solidarity, Answers to the Watershed Moment. Now, contrary to wide expectations, he didn't mention North Korea directly by name, but rather the larger joint goal to defend freedom and peace. As critics both praise and take apart the details of the diplomatic developments, what are the major takeaways? We're joined by an expert, Dr. Byung-joo of the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good morning, Professor Kim.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk in detail about President Yoon's first speech at the UN General Assembly. High anticipation surrounded the attendance as it is dubbed the Super Bowl of global diplomacy. What were some of the most notable points?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was an 11-minute speech. And looking back, other speeches in the past made by Korean presidents, it's rather short. 11 minutes means in English speech text, it's about 1,250 or so words. So rather short, but it has a distinct kind of style this time. I remember looking back, I think it was 1988 or late 80s when President Rotaeo gave his first speech at the UN General Assembly as the Korean president. And since then, all presidents have been giving this speech. But this time, most global looking in a way. And you mentioned the fact that President Yoon didn't mention North Korea this time. So that kind of reflects his global focus altogether. In his short 1,200 words in English, he gave it in Korean, but like in English text. Right. First part was about general principles and his idea about the importance of freedom and then how the world community has supported this important value of freedom through solidarity, countries working together. Those countries that support the principle of freedom, we must work together. That point was made early on. And then second part in his short speech, he discussed the broader challenges that the world community face altogether. Disease, hunger, illiteracy, and the energy and culture, different challenges we face. And he was relating his point that the cause for supporting freedom all relates to these challenges that our global community face together. Third part, he said, he mentioned what Korea as an important member of global community has been doing in order to address those challenges. He mentioned ODAs, the support for the developing countries, and Korea's contribution for COVID-19 research, and then the contribution to Global Fund addressing the question of pandemic and other diseases, and also Korea's contribution to climate change cooperation, as well as the support for other countries to develop their own e-government and the more cutting-edge style of government services improvements and so on. So he mentioned that part, Korea's contribution, and third part. And then the last, fourth part, he went back to the general principle of freedom and solidarity and also support for freedom and solidarity that's needed, to promote freedom. But also he expressed caution against the world as a whole falling into different blocks. That kind of movement is not desirable. And he ended his speech saying, more than anything, this kind of global solidarity and cooperation, Korea has been the biggest receiver of this kind of global cooperation and enjoyed some of the greatest benefits, and therefore Korea has a strong commitment to it. So overall, the flow was good, very global speech, and as a debut speech for President Yoon, it was rather distinct in that regard as compared to other presidents' speeches, Korean presidents' speeches to the UN General Assembly in the past.
Maybe that reflects a changed global standing or the focus of President Yoon going forward. But
Sure thing.
of
Yeah.
course, not everyone agrees that it was a successful speech. There are pundits who will decipher and take it apart. Now, domestic reactions to the speech itself has been divided, to say the least. How do we characterize these key criticisms as well as main praises, Dr. Kim?
Right. President Yoon's party, People Power Party, and the supporters were saying that this was a very good thing that Korea had an opportunity to express global values as a key member of global community. As you mentioned, Korea's improved status in the world as a whole. This was a very fitting one, and also this speech set a clear direction for Korea's diplomacy, multilateralist diplomacy going forward, particularly on issues of climate change, food crisis, and energy crisis, and so on. So those were words of praise. And of course, from the other side, the critics, Democratic Party, the opposition party, and the critics, they were saying that these were rather vague, generalist and lacking specifics, and couldn't tell exactly where Korea is heading altogether, without mentioning North Korea and without mentioning the peace on Korean Peninsula. The specifics were all lacking, and so they thought this was not a successful speech at all. Countering that criticism, however, the President Yoon's side once again made a point that these were more appealing to the global community as compared to last speech by previous President Moon Jae-in talking about the end of Korean War on Korean Peninsula. Those were kind of like vague and unspecific, kind of dreamy words coming from Korean president to the world audience. So that was the rebuttal from President Yoon's side against the criticism for his speech this time. So the exchange, as usual, going back and forth. That's what we saw.
I mean, that is their duty, is it not? As to counter each other, and somewhere in the middle is a compromise that might be the best decision for South Korea. But that's also a really vague statement coming from me. I'm just an observer. But I mean, given the nature of these speeches, doesn't it have to be to a certain extent vague and generalist? You can't give away everything. That's the delicacies of diplomacy.
Exactly. I mean, you have so many heads of states giving this speech at one time, and your time is limited, and then you just want to make your mark as a contributor to this podium. So, I mean, you can go on forever like Gaddafi once did. I think he went on for extreme amount. I forget the time, but Libya's former president, he went on for an incredible amount of time, and nobody can stop you if you do so. But the thing is, you want to be fitting presence. You want to offer a fitting presence and fitting remarks in a long list of heads of states giving these speeches at the podium of the UN General Assembly.
Let's talk about the angle of sales diplomacy. President Yoon also conducted what they dub sales diplomacy, securing investment commitments of the North American companies. What are some of the key facts to be reminded of at this point?
I think, first of all, as the U.S. Biden administration is trying to secure Korea's investment into the United States, and then showing these actions of limiting Korea's electric vehicle market access to the U.S. and so on, the overall Korean public opinion is not standing well, on the support of the United States. And maybe it's possible that Yoon government was trying to balance the picture altogether, highlighting the fact that it's not only Korean businesses that are investing in the United States, but it's the other way around. That there are flows coming into Korea. I think that's one of the key messages, trying to convey a sense of balance. And so, in this regard, President Yoon attended a meeting where the 7 North American companies expressed and then reconfirmed or repeated their commitment to invest in Korea. For example, Applied Materials, this is the world's largest semiconductor equipment maker, and they said they are going to invest in Korea in terms of expansion of R&D capabilities for their semiconductor equipment. And so that's good news. big old names like DuPont and the new players like Entegris. These were also the businesses that are doing their own work on semiconductor materials, and they are expanding their R&D centers here in Korea. So that added good news together at this event where President Yoon attended. And battery makers like a Solid Energy System, another American company I understand, again, their pledge on R&D center for their EV batteries, which is very important. As we have this EV, electric vehicle issues with the United States, the news that U.S. business is investing in Korea for their R&D, that's, again, very, very good news. Canadian renewable energy developer Northland Power, in my understanding, I think that business has been working in Korea to expand their presence in terms of power generation, wind power generation, but they attended the meeting saying they're going to further strengthen their business here altogether. And there were other high-tech related investors like EMP, Bellstar, and so on. They were saying they're going to expand their presence in terms of expanding their operation of using the liquefied natural gas's cold effect, helping the cold chain supply. Cold chain supply is very important for vaccines and so on. So those points were made by these 7 businesses, and this was a healthy balancing act, I think, offered by the Korean government in balance.
The discussion of the investment commitments remind us of a hot topic. Korea's leading companies had made their pledges to invest in the U.S., but this goodwill gesture was quickly followed by the introduction of a new U.S. law, the Inflation Reduction Act, fundamentally making it difficult for Korea's automakers to sell their electric vehicles in the U.S. market with a competitive edge. To what extent can we say President Yoon made a difference in addressing the HOP issue during this visit to the United States?
The presidential office announced that there were 3 meetings with Biden in London and in New York this time, even though the official summit, sitting down summit was not materialized. And I think we saw some of the video images of, President Yoon making some strong point facing President Biden standing up. And we can assume these were points about this Inflation Reduction Act, like electric vehicle subsidy points. And so there's some critics were saying, it was only about 48 seconds summit, so it was not exactly a summit. But in my own assessment, this short encounters, but with very pressing point, highlighting point, could be quite effective. I mean, as compared to just sitting down summit, going over a long list of general issues. This is elevated pitch, if you will. So if we really care about sending message about where Korea stands on United States Inflation Reduction Act and then EV subsidies issue and so on, I believe to a reasonable extent President Yoon made a important mark in the minds of Joe Biden in terms as a reminder.
In Korean media outlets, perhaps it is our job. Many observers and commentators have offered critical assessment for President Yoon's overseas trip this time. What is your take on that?
I guess we had 4 points, and for the past several days in Korean media, there we had the 4 points about, how President Yoon's diplomacy this time did not produce the expected results. The critics were saying, number 1 was the failure of paying a tribute to the late Queen before the funeral, attending the funeral. And number 2 is no sitting down summit with Biden. Number 3 is the way the meeting with Kishida, Japanese Prime Minister, went. Then number 4 was President Yoon's private words being recorded and being shared in the public. So those 4 points were all points of contention. If we had more time, I can go over one by one, pointing out the problems with the criticism, if you will. But I guess we don't have much time. But I just wanted to say, for instance, the first 2, what happened in London, and then what happened in New York with Biden. We have to be reminded that, of course, Korean foreign policy making apparatus, they have to do their very best to achieve what's announced to the people. The thing is, at the end of the day, diplomacy and foreign policy, we have only control over half of the picture in this protocol and so on. So I think as much as Korean government's diplomats are being blamed for this, for instance, United Kingdom for failing to anticipate their traffic and then managing their protocol, and therefore failing to have Korean presidents, allowing Korean president time to give pay tribute to the late Queen. I think it's UK government's failure as much as it's a failure on the Korean side. And also the absence of sitting down summit with Biden. As much as we tried, Korean government tried, if U.S. government could not find time in dealing with all these heads of states in New York. It's a crazy time every fall when you have General Assembly meetings. But if they can find time, or even a second point is, if Biden administration did not want to sit down together to talk about these EV issues, which is very tricky, and a blunder on their side, and then they don't want to admit it before November election, and maybe they didn't want to sit down and talk about it. So the other half of the picture, the other half of the picture where we don't have control over it, I think making too much big deal out of it is not exactly a healthy thing to do for Korea as a country, as a nation. That's my take.
Is it conducive to making better policies and moving forward? I think you raise a really important point that maybe all democracies can take note of. We do get a lot of updates, and it's our job to take apart every detail of it. But what is a big picture question at hand? So last but not the least, what can we say are some of the key points we should keep in mind in promoting more productive domestic discourse on Korea's foreign policy?
Yeah, talking about foreign policy, keeping in mind, especially in these protocol matters, the half of the picture is controlled by the other country. And I think that's mature understanding of how international affairs are conducted, especially on protocol side, and taking big deal out of it and making as a material domestic fight. It looks a little bit immature and seems to lack the understanding of how international affairs are being conducted. So I hope going forward, we can have a better discussion, better discourse on, these key issues and performance of the government this time. And so I want to see a improvement and progress the way Korean media and Korean public deals with these issues that happen outside the boundary of this country.
More mature discussions. In order to do that, you have to tune in every Monday to GMS Focus. You're only smart as the information you feed yourself. So thank you so much, Professor Kim. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thank you very much.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.